Hi there, I'm Steve Bauer, North District Commissioner, Kitsap County, and you're watching Commissioner's Corner. Over the last couple of years, we've talked about a number of things that are really critical to the future of Kitsap County. One of them was the Puget Sound, the health of Puget Sound and Hood Canal, the fact that both of them are in distress, and the things that we need to do in order to preserve their long-term health and restore them. One of the things we've talked about in the program is the county's water as a resource policy and how we really need to rethink how we use, rather than throw away stormwater and the effluent coming out of our sewer plants, how we need to maintain the natural forest and ecosystem to take the rainwater and preserve our water in the ground that we rely on, since we don't have mountains and snowpacks for water in this county. I think one of the most interesting opportunities for the future that will really define this community has been the North Kitsap Legacy Partnership, which has been a partnership between Olympic Property Group and Kitsap County that has the potential of adding 6,000 to 7,000 acres of permanent public open space in the north end of the county. Now, why is that important? Well, these are really huge blocks, and what happens on that 6,000 to 7,000 acres will absolutely define what happens in the character of our county in the north end forever. We know that those forests are really important for wildlife, they're really important for the water cycle, they're important for climate control and handling carbon dioxide. But one of the most important reasons is that we use them for public access. Right now, those thousands of acres are used every weekend for bicyclists and hiking and other activities. The North Kitsap Trails Association has worked for the last couple of years with a grant from the National Park Service in preparing a water and land trail system for the north end. And it's really critical that we have that land for the long term to preserve that access. As we add 150,000 people over the decades to come, it's really going to be important for the quality of life that we preserve that rural feel, and we've got an access to a natural environment, plus it potentially contributes to an ecotourism economy. Now, that land's been in commercial tree farms, and we've got a couple of slides that we'll show you now. The first one you're going to see is just a stand of this timber on the side of the road. And what you're going to see as you look at it are fairly thin, small trees that are all crammed together. There isn't much access or light in there. And that's the good picture. Now, the second picture you're going to look at right now, actually in the foreground, shows a recent clear cut because this has been commercial land. It's harvested on a 30 to 50 year cycle. It's a monoculture, which means that only Douglas firs have been planted on it, displacing the natural species that would have been there. And you can see the effect of this clear cut. And in the distance, what you see are these spindly, tall trees all crammed together like spaghetti. And if we're going to talk about the county owning that land for the long term, that's not the way the public is going to want to manage that land. So one of the challenges for us is we've looked at the NKLP program, is what does the county do to manage that? Now, the second piece is, so that's 6,000 to 7,000 potential acres in the future that we need to be prepared for. But right now, the county in its park system has another 6,000 forested acres of parks that range from 50 to over 1,000 acres. And as one of our guests today said, we've tended to think of those parks as parks that have trees in them, when in fact the reality is those are forests that are also used for park purposes. And with the map that we'll show you right now on the screen, and you won't see a lot of detail, but you can see how those forests and those parks are spread throughout the county. The 3 heritage parks in south and central and north, but a lot of other parks that have trees and forests associated with them. The fact is that we don't manage those forests. We manage the parks portion of it. But because we haven't had the money and we haven't had the expertise, we really haven't managed the forest component of each of those properties. Public works lands in the county have an undisclosed additional amount of forest that we also don't manage, and we need to for the long term. So the equivalent, I think I was trying to think of an analogy about this today, and what we do with those forested parks right now is a little like having a building, and you have a lot of programming inside and you spend time thinking about how you program inside, but you never worry about the paint and the siding, you never worry about the roof, and at some point that has consequences. So I've got two extraordinary guests today that have helped prepare a policy and an approach for the county for managing of those lands that will provide the resources and provide a long-term stewardship of those forests. And the goal really is to move away from these tree farms that we've inherited over the years and really restore the natural forest. So we're talking about, and this is really important, I think, with the NKLP program, the North Kitsap Legacy Partnership, we're talking about forever. And if we get our head in the right mindset, and we don't get many opportunities to do this in our society, but we're really talking about how we manage those forests forever as well. So the discussion that we want to have today is, what are those forests likely to look like 500 or 1,000 years from now if we put this program in place? My guests are Arnold Bergstrom, who is the county extension forester, among many other things, and Walter Briggs, who wants me to emphasize he's here as a private citizen, but his day job is the Navy's forester. And we're really talking about a program that is modeled on something that Walter's been doing for 20 years. So we're not talking about theory here, we're talking about practice. And a little later in the program, we'll actually show you a DVD so you can see on the ground what this looks like. So thanks to both of you. These two guys have spent a huge amount of time putting this policy together for us. It's very much in draft form. We're sharing it with the public for comment. I think it'll take the rest of the year to flesh this out and actually begin it, but we wanted to show it to you today because we think it's really powerful. So thank you both for being here. I really appreciate everything you've done in getting us this far. So my first question is that you've both been out in the parks, you've seen them. Give me your idea, and the public, your idea of what's the state of the parks, and is it okay to just continue what we've been doing? Who wants to start? Arnold?
Well, the problem with the parks is that people become attached to the way they look. And they remember the way they look because they visited to go on a picnic or a family outing or something, and they forget to realize that, or they don't realize, parks change. Trees change, the shrubs change, the plant communities will change over time. The extreme example of this change you will find in places like Seattle that are now looking at parks that have all these old trees that are in decline and maybe have disease or defect, and they don't have a younger cohort coming up in order that they will be the adult old trees in 30 or 50 or 100 years. There are opportunities to make the parks safer, to increase access, safe access, meaning not only for the people that go in, but in case of emergency services or fire or anything that might be needed. So silvicultural treatment, I think, is important and would be a benefit.
Arnold, you've been out and looked at the parks. What's your assessment of the state of them?
Yeah, I've looked at a number of, really a wide variety of conditions. There are parks in the county that, in the forests there, that are in a wide range of stages. There's a park in South End, Coulter Creek Heritage Park, I believe it's called, and it has a lot of younger, less mature stands. It's a large tract. Haven't been able to look at. It's almost 1,200 acres. It's a lot of ground, and it had been an active tree farm for a number of years. That's an example of probably a third growth situation. And then we have parks that have been were part of state under state management, like Illahee and Banner Forest, and they were pretty actively managed, and they're in a variety of condition as far as some really nice, fairly old dominant trees and stands, and in some areas where they had been some active logging and management, say in the last 20 to 30 years. And then there are places that where I can think of Anderson Landing Preserve, and it has a stand that really reflects the early settlement and the early logging and the fact that it was a homestead, and it was never a tree farm really. It was pasture land and a lot of fencing and stuff. It was kind of probably when the settler family had it, it was like a stump farm, and it's in a totally different condition. We have We have every kind of stand condition or forest condition imaginable here. And there's tremendous opportunity that goes along with that. And the stands that are, the forests that are younger aged, there's an opportunity to really help promote the most vigorous trees and introduce species, as you referenced, that would normally be there that may not be there now if they aren't there. So we pretty much have everything imaginable in terms of a forest condition here with the 6,000 acres of county-owned land.
So one of the things that I've heard from you guys is that if you don't have an active management program, then you've got diseased trees that spread to others, and we don't have any assessment of that. We don't cure that. We're not taking out the diseased trees that threaten others. We've got history in the county of some dangerous trees we didn't remove and ended up paying liability claims for it. And if we're going to make the park safe for people, we need to do that as well. So let's talk a little about the rough outlines of the program. What have you done, Walter, in the past year? And we'll see a lot of that on the video, but quickly, maybe some of the highlights of what we're proposing.
Well, basically it involves thinning second growth and reducing the number of trees so we have fewer larger trees headed towards what in techno jargon's a late cereal stage or an old growth type of a structure where you have fewer larger trees per acre, and yet at the same time you'll have layers of vegetation going up to the forest canopy so that there's vertical structural diversity, and then going across the forest horizontally you would have structural diversity because of the different species. Some are shade tolerant, some are not. Then you have different age classes. As if we can diversify the structure of the forest, we can increase the use by wildlife, make it a much more productive in terms of birds or deer or raccoons, whatever people want to see, by increasing the amount of forage and the structural diversity. So what we've focused on has been thinning to increase the vigor of individual trees and to promote the development of understory and structural diversity.
So some of the pieces that I've heard as a layperson here is that we'd go in, if we take that Pope property, for instance, as an example, we'd do a lot of selective thinning. We'd take out the weaker, younger trees to leave the others to grow, and we're talking 400 to 500-year-old Doug firs. We'd take areas where Doug firs were planted, but other species would have existed, and we'd replant, so we'd plant cedars and others where they would have naturally grown. So we restore the diversity of the forest. So we're actually, in the end, we're showing people when we're done with this, and this would be decades from now, what the natural forest would have been in the first place. And we'd have more diversity for wildlife, we'd have more diversity for the vegetation that's there. And by taking selective thinning and doing some harvesting, we produce enough income that we can pay for the management of those forests, which has really been a problem for us in the past. And one of the things that I like about what you've done is you've done it with horse logging. And I think that that's because it's environmentally sensitive. We'll see that in the DVD. But also because I think it shows, it just keeps alive a craft here that has been lost in terms of an art form, but makes a lot of sense in the modern world, and we can do that. So Arno, so the other piece of this that I understand is that for each parcel, we'd go out and we would actually do an inventory and an assessment of that parcel, and we would have a plan for each one. So it isn't cookie cutter, one size fits all, and that's partly where I think, Arno, you and your work with the extension and volunteers comes in. Talk about what are opportunities for citizens and volunteers to get involved in this?
Yeah, right now we're in the process of launching a stewardship program that focuses on gathering that data, all kinds of data, but some of the basic information that we need in soils and timber and habitat and working with citizens, some of which are already very active in the county park system and supporting the parks. Those individuals will be trained and they'll do the field work, and my intent is that they would, as I talked to a group of them last night, they will actually be very, very involved in crafting the stewardship plan for that property, and with the idea that their participation will give it that element of citizen involvement, and I'd like to think some credibility as well. And myself and Walter and a number of other resource experts will serve in in an advisory or coaching role with that process as it unfolds. Of course, with the amount of land and number of parks we have, it's going to take some time to do this.
One of Gifford Pinchot's maxims for foresters is if you're trying to do something the public doesn't accept, stop and educate them, teach them about it. And we can do that as professional foresters. We can go out and introduce them to the things we do, the tools we use. And when we're taking a measurement, what are we actually measuring? What do we see when we go out there? And how do we incorporate that into a management plan and then the prescriptions and the follow-on actual implementation? And by involving the public and educating them, we get their input, we get their buy-in, and in the end, we have a product in terms of a plan and a management scheme and policy that everybody agrees on. And then, as Arno says, it's tailored landholding by landholding, and within that, stand by stand. So it wouldn't be just take a park and do the same thing across the entire property. We will tailor that to the particular.
That's a good segue to a point I want to make, and that is that this is a draft policy. And I think a lot of people who are stewards in some of our larger parks and things could look at this and say, oh my gosh, what are they talking about doing? This is just in draft stage. We're going to be talking with the Parks Board. We're going to be going out and meeting with each of the stewardship groups in those parks. We're going to be meeting with the public. There's going to be months of discussion before this is put together, so there'll be plenty of opportunity. But what I want to underscore for people is, unlike what has happened up in the Pope land, we're not talking about forestry. We're talking about forests. We're talking about healthy forests. And if we're talking about income, it is incidental to the process of managing a healthy forest, and that money would stay there to support the healthy forest and the trails development and other activities.
I think it's paramount that that be emphasized, that they understand that the motivation for this management plan or policy is not to go out and liquidate the forest.
Right.
We're trying to create a healthier forest for the sake of having a healthy forest for public
Long-term.
access and use long term, not 80 or 100 years, but 500, 700, 1,000 years. And that the funding generated from the sale of products will be sequestered into a separate account and used only for forest projects, tree planting, trails, or whatever it would be. The film you're going to see was made by Evergreen State College, a journalism class, in conjunction with a forestry class that wanted to come out and learn about the forest practices the Navy's been using for over 30 years now. And they videotaped horse logging and then edited that into a video, about 11 minutes, as their term project. And it was a profoundly successful project for the school, and it's also a huge aid to me and the commissioner and Arno in letting people know what this really looks like on the ground. One of the reasons we're thinning these second growth forests is to increase the growth of the trees as individuals. You can see the larger rings here from the bullseye on out, and then the rings become very, very small, and that happens when the stand is too crowded. The crowns grow together, the crowns reduce in size, and the tree actually loses photosynthetic capacity, and so it grows more and more slowly. And you've probably got about 25 rings right there, and then another 25 here. So you can see how the growth is just reduced. That also reduces the vigor of the tree and its health. And if everybody remembers Jurassic Park, the little lump of amber with the bug in it, that's nothing but 4-million-year-old tree pitch, and that's what they do to fight disease and insects. They exude pitch. So if we keep them healthy and vigorous, they can pump out more pitch and fight insects. So by thinning the forest, we're going to enlarge the size of these growth rings and keep healthier, more vigorous trees.
I got started in horse logging about 25 years ago. I've been around horses since I was 6 or 7. Working part-time summer work in the woods, and saw a guy horse logging, and started in from there. We got a horse, my brother and I got a single horse, and spent a month putting a load of logs together, which today takes us 4 or 5 hours to do. So a lot of hit and miss and a lot of just trying it out. It's, I just like everything about it. I like being around them. It's a privilege to be out here with these horses and have something to do with them. We train these horses basically by tying them off to a trained horse, an experienced horse. Both these colts were trained with their mother You literally tie them off to the good horse and drive the good horse, and the colts will pick it up. They'll work on 5 or 6 different voice commands, basic left and right, stop and go, and some variations of that. Things you just can't do with machinery. Makes it a lot more fun to be able to do it that way. This is pretty plain logging harness. Most important parts are the collars. They're fitted to each horse, and they're padded here with these striped pads to take some of the impact out of it. Metal hames that attach to the tugs here, these leather straps, and they will go back and hook onto this rigging here, this double tree. So the mechanics of it is a horse pushing on the collar here, and it transfers back to this chain. We pull the log out. We've got blinders on the bridles. Mostly that's used for farm implements so they don't see everything that's going on behind them. It's also handy in the woods for eye protection if we're brushing up against things.
Well, when we started 21 years ago, we just marked out a small patch of woods that we thought the horse logger could handle. And then we wrote a contract that required that the logs be moved from the woods, basically from the stump to the landing, using horses. They were not allowed to use machinery. And since that time, we have continued to put out timber sales. We do keep them at a scale that is feasible for horse loggers because they have a smaller checkbook than large timber companies. So they're sized appropriately for the economics of it, and then the prescription is such that horses are the best tool for this kind of thinning on this kind of ground. Our basic prescription is 100 trees, 100 merchantable trees per acre as leave trees, which gives you a spacing of about 20 feet on center. We are thinning from below, meaning we're removing the smaller trees instead of the larger trees. We want to take all of the site potential for growth out of several hundred trees per acre and put it onto about 100 trees so that we have fewer larger trees. Ultimately, what we end up with is a more vigorous and a more healthier forest.
Dave. Dave. Oh. Dave. Oh. Easy, G. Whoa. Whoa. Step out, Whoa. Easy. Ha. Ha. Whoa. We're standing on a major skid trail here. We've been using this for, I don't know, 50 or 60 turns so far already, and this is the amount of impact we're going to have. This is as bad as it gets. We've got no scarred trees from yarding the logs by them. It's just very low impact logging. By contract, we are allowed to scar 4% of the trees here before we pay any penalty, which would be 4 trees per acre. It'd be 160 trees in this 40-acre piece. We could scar and not pay a penalty. If we have more than 10 or 15 trees on this 40 acres that are scarred, it's time for me to put a new crew together because we're doing something wrong. We just don't have that kind of impact at all on these trees. What this team is real good at is pulling 1,000 pounds all day long, never stopping, going back and forth, getting 50 logs out in a day. This kind of timber, appropriate technology calls for draft horses.
So all in all, our prescription, our goals for thinning, and the size of the timber we're working in, thinning from below, all combine to make it a very nice operation with horses. We've talked a lot about the low impact of horse logging and the small effect that the horses have on the forest. I'm standing smack dab in the middle of a skid trail where we were logging 1 year ago. And as you see, we have ferns, huckleberry, salal, wild rose, gorse, stinging nettles, grass, all growing up here. There is just really very little impact. Down here we have sprouts of salal coming up, mature salal invading and covering. So we don't have the soil compaction and the turmoil and the large swath that you can get with machinery. Just very, very low impact. And you look behind me, all the way out there, it's hard to actually pick out where the skid trail may have been because of the uniform coverage of vegetation. Well, 21 years ago, we thinned this area with horses. This was our first horse thinning timber sale. And we had essentially the same criteria that we do now. We've refined it, made a few small changes. A lot of people looked at this. They were peeking over the fence saying that will never work. The watershed people, the U.S. Forest Service, private timber companies, they all looked at it and said, well, it's cute, but you can't do that economically, and you can't manage a forest that way using horses. So it was a matter of education and proving to people that it would work. So once you get into the mindset of thinking in these longer terms, you start to wonder, well, why would anybody think about 20 and 30 and 50 years from now? I mean, we aren't there yet. We can't get there in that short amount of time. Reinhold Niebuhr has a fabulous poem, and I can't remember all of it, but there's something about nothing significant can be achieved in our lifetime, and therefore we have to be saved by faith. So in a way, it's an act of faith that when Jerry and I depart, the next generation of foresters and horse loggers will come along and feel the way that we do about this.
Well, and we're going to leave them such a wonderful stand that they would have to take care of it.
Yeah.
It's going to be well set up. It's going to be on the road, and they'd be foolish not to.
Yeah, and that's all we can do is head it in the right direction, and then let the next generation take over. If they don't follow the path that we have lined out, Jerry and I are both going to come back and haunt them.
Back. Well, let's go home. Easy, Bill. Bill. Around, Jake. Jake.
Nice and fresh over there.
So I think you'll agree that that was a terrific DVD, and it really brings this whole program down to a level that we can see. And imagine 500 or 1,000 years from now having restored the natural forest and having done that for future generations. Imagine families 50 years from now going out and watching horse teams work doing logging. It's really powerful, and I hope that you'll stay involved and support the development of this program, because I think it's terribly important.